Hello, you are watching the Supply Chain Digital Show, brought to you by Supply Chain Digital Magazine, Procurement Magazine, and BizClick Media Group. My name is Sean Ashcroft. I'm editor of Supply Chain Digital. Now, in this show, we bring you all the latest news, analysis, and opinion from the world of supply chain every 2 weeks, right here on LinkedIn, YouTube, and other digital platforms. Joining us as usual is Procurement Magazine editor Georgia Wilson.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Georgia, how are you doing there?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Now, a quick reminder at this point for all of you watching, please do say hello by posting in the comments section just underneath the show, and also vote in our LinkedIn poll, which is still live. On which note, Georgia, what is our poll this week?
Yeah, so this week's poll looks at the following supply chain ESG transgressions and which one is most damaging to a company's brand. So the options were greenwashing, forced labour, non-inclusivity, or whether they were all equally as damaging as each other. So what are your thoughts on the poll, Sean? What do you
Yeah,
think will be?
it'll be quite interesting to see what people say about that, because the ESG thing is absolutely huge at the moment, and it's something that companies have got no choice other than to be engaged with, because any transgressions and it can damage their brand. So we'll be interested to see which of those elements people think are particularly damaging.
Yeah, definitely. When we set it up earlier, I thought it's going to be a really hard one to pick and to decide. So it'll be interesting to see what people have to say. But we'll be sharing the results of that poll at the end of the show. But there's loads to talk about before then. So, Sean, should we start by looking at some of the latest supply chain and procurement news?
Let's do it.
Cool. So, Sean, did you want to start?
Yes, thanks, Georgia. Well, a couple of things have caught my eye over the past 2 weeks since the last show. One was a story that I wrote about food catastrophe worldwide that has been predicted by the UN in the wake of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Now, the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres is warning that the Ukraine war is causing severe food insecurity in countless developing nations who rely heavily on Ukraine, particularly Ukraine wheat, for their domestic supplies. Countries such as Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, other countries in sub-Saharan Africa as well. There's also Pakistan and Turkey, who rely heavily on Ukraine wheat. Now, before the war, Ukraine was the sixth largest wheat exporter last year, accounting for 10% of all global exports. And a lot of that wheat is still in the fields. It's still in the silos. It just isn't going anywhere. And the country is in talks with Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia to try and export some of it across its friendly borders. But there's problems to that, because Ukraine actually has a different gauge of railway to the rest of Europe. It's wider, so they'd actually have to unload the grain and reload it. That would take time. And who knows if Russia might target shipments anyway. But in some ways, the ongoing problem, just as serious as this and compounding it, was pre-existing, predates the war, and that's that the food supply chain is pretty inefficient in large areas of the world, particularly in the developing world. And the UN Food and Agricultural Organization has even warned that there's annually maybe 400 tons of food, 400 million tons of food lost every year to suboptimal supply chains, and that this could be affecting as many as 690 million people. Again, this predates the war. So yes, the Ukraine war is compounding the situation, but there was, a worrying problem that long predates the war in Ukraine. So I thought that was quite an eye opener.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a sort of a phrase that keeps cropping up at the moment that the only real certain thing at the moment is that there seems to be a lot of uncertainty about what's going to be happening in the future. And I mean, I know we're certainly, even just here we're sort of feeling the effects of things in the shelves in stores and stuff. And
Absolutely.
so, you can't imagine what the people that are actually closer and to Ukraine and to those places that rely more heavily on those countries, how they're being impacted by all this.
Yeah, I mean, not having enough sunflower oil is quite piffling in comparison to the stuff that a lot of other countries are going through.
Yeah, certainly. Like I say, it's just we're obviously feeling just the tiny little bits of it compared to what people that are a lot closer and how they're being impacted by it. So what's your second story, Sean?
Well, Georgia, this one is based on an annual Gartner report looking at women in supply chain, and it shows that women in supply chain fare better in larger companies, particularly multinational companies. So this year, the report said that women account for 19% of C-suite positions in the average supply chain. But it also said that the total number of women at vice presidential level in supply chain is down 2% on last year, down to 21%. But I thought the key or the headline thing from this report was that global organizations are far more likely to have women in director positions than medium or large companies. And this seems to be because women who are in mid-career increasingly are leaving their positions because they lack advancement opportunities. And I guess that feeds into the Great Resignation as well, and the kind of factory reset that people have went through on that journey through the pandemic, where their work-life balance or their workplace expectations have shifted, but also more women are leaving for better pay because, of course, it's an employee market, not an employer market. So, but kind of worryingly, just 59% of businesses who responded to this Gartner report said they have plans to close the gender pay gap. So can't see that situation changing anytime soon.
The last couple of years have certainly kick-started this kind of shift in people's mindsets and how what they want from an organization, what they and what they place more value in.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the working from home, isn't it, that's probably triggered a lot of this, and now the hybrid working. It's sort of shifted everything, hasn't it? Really, in terms of what people expect from their work-life balance. And anyway, Georgia, what about procurement? What have you spotted over the last fortnight?
Yeah, so my first one is a report from Kiova. They're a sourcing optimization and automation software company. So the report looked at the shifts in priorities for chief procurement officers in 2022. And a lot of that has been driven by sort of the dynamic and complex challenges that the last couple of years have brought. So the sort of top 4 priorities in the report included managing supply risk. That was at the top, with 44% seeing this as a priority for the future. Then 38% were prioritizing cost savings. Digital transformation was also one, with 34% recognizing the need to close their existing technology gaps. And then finally, there was the need for best-in-class solutions. So according to the report, the best-in-class sourcing teams run significantly more competitive sourcing events because they are 51% more likely to have e-sourcing solutions in place.
Yeah, that's, you know what, I think it really catches my eye about this story is that, you know, pre-pandemic, procurement was largely a sort of cost function, wasn't it? A cost management function within businesses. And now there's a much heavier sort of strategy element to what they do. So that the fact that only 38% of CPOs said they're prioritizing cost savings, I wonder what that would have been pre-pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I remember rightly from the report as well, it was that even just compared to last year, it almost doubled in its in the amount. So it has shifted, but obviously that it still seems like maybe there's a bit more to go if only 38% of people are doing it. But yeah.
And so, what about your second story, Georgia?
Yeah, so my second one is some insights from SAP on the concept of circular economy. So it sort of talks about how the consumption of natural resources has the potential to have devastating effects on human, wildlife, and the planet, particularly sort of at the rates that today's procurement and supply chain functions requires these resources with the increasing demands. So you know, now more than ever, there's this need to move away from a linear model to a circular economy. The insights from SAP also emphasize the importance of the function taking responsibility when it comes to ESG, not only from a moral standpoint, but from like a sort of a business continuity perspective as well. Because some interesting facts were that 49% of investors globally would divest from companies that are not taking sufficient actions when it comes to ESG issues, with 79% identifying that organizations' management of ESG risks and opportunity is also another important factor when they make their investment decisions.
I mean, it directly goes back to the poll, doesn't it, really? The reader poll about ESG transgressions and, you know, how damaging they could potentially be to a brand and what's driving companies to make progress on this front. Yeah, it's something that's going to dominate, you know, executive agendas, I think, for decades to come, probably.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot. It was kind of there in the background, but the like last couple of years, it's definitely been amplified. Like people are being more forced into the discussions.
And well, thank you for that, Georgia. And in fact, still on in ESG, the mention of which brings us on to our special guest. I'm delighted to be able to welcome Paul Butcher, who is CEO of LRQA. This is an organization which helps businesses mitigate risk on everything from ESG compliance to data-driven supply chain transformation. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Sean. Delighted to be with you today.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to have you here. So, George, I don't know if you were listening in on myself and Georgia chatting about ESG compliance and developments on that front. I know that's something that you at LRQA are heavily involved in. I wondered if you could just take a moment to explain what it is that LRQA does and who your audience is, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And yeah, it was a great conversation to listen in on, because many of the things you were talking about are the issues that we're dealing with day to day. LRQA is one of the world's leading global assurance providers. Our core business is helping our clients to manage risk in an increasingly complex landscape, particularly in the last couple of years. You know, some of the issues you were touching on show how that risk dynamic has changed. And our focus really is about how we help organizations manage their global supply chains and the risks that are inherent in those. That means we're really supporting our customers to run their business better, safer, cleaner, more resilient, and more ethically. And there's plenty of opportunity for us in that area as well. We were originally part of Lloyd's Register. LRQA was launched out as an independent business in July last year. And we've bring with it decades of experience in the area of brand assurance, certification, cybersecurity, inspection, and training. So right across every industry sector. We operate in 160 companies around the world, and we really pride ourselves on the technical expertise that we bring to bear. 30 of the top accreditation bodies in the world recognize us and the services that we provide. But perhaps most importantly, over 50% of the world's top 200 companies trust us to help them with their brand assurance needs.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. So we have a poll in today's show asking our followers which supply chain ESG transgression is most damaging to a brand, which was greenwashing, forced labour, or inclusivity. So what would be your answer here?
I think, again, referring back to your earlier conversation, the risk landscape is changing for companies. And I think, to me, it's very clear that all three of those matter. And actually, I think depending on where your business is at any one time, it may be that one has greater or lesser significance. And I think that's the nature of the changing environment that our clients are operating in. I don't think you have the option to ignore any one of them. And therefore, they're crucial. I mean, perhaps just unpack them a little bit. If I think about, the greenwashing one, I was reading just earlier this morning about the S&P ESG ratings and rankings, and Elon Musk was getting a little bit upset that Tesla had been bumped out of the ratings, yet there were 6 oil companies ranked in the top 10. And I think that comes to one of the challenges we have around this whole question of greenwashing, and can we rely on the claims that organizations are making about their green and environmental credentials? And I think for us, the key to that is those data and those claims need to be verified. Another challenge we often see for organizations is around the area of forced labor, making sure that not just your own organization, but your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers are addressing those challenges is particularly important. And I think particularly important in, I was going to say a post-pandemic world, but the Ukraine situation exacerbates it, where you are changing suppliers. That brings with it a much greater heightened risk of things you don't know happening in your supply chain. And so that ability to know what's going on is crucial to our clients to help them, to protect their brand. And I think the challenge we see for organizations is it's not just one pressure. It's not just consumers deciding whether they're going to buy your product because they like you. You've got other companies deciding whether they're going to work with you or not and partner with you. You've got a battle for talent. And we see this as we're doing our own recruitment. People are making very deliberate choices about the organizations that they're going to work for. And they want to work for an organization that's focused on, all of these topics, not just one of them, but wanting to do the right thing. And then, of course, we're seeing legislation come into play that's starting to make a real impact. So we've got the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act comes into effect next year, and it's going to make organizations trading or doing business in Germany manage their social and environmental issues. In the US, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, that comes into effect on the 21st of June, where shipments can be seized if companies are not able to demonstrate that they're ensuring that products are not coming from Xinjiang in China. So real pressures on organizations to make sure that they're managing these risks across the whole aspect of their supply chain. And I think that's where we play a crucial role in terms of helping them not only put in place the policies and procedures, but actually being able to independently verify that what an organization claims is happening is actually what's happening on the ground. We can go in, we can verify it, and we can really give them that comfort that what's being claimed is what's happening.
So, I mean, Paul, your company is helping your customers mitigate against risk in their supply chains and across their organizations, like you say, in a landscape of extreme uncertainty and ongoing uncertainty. But where do you see this situation being, say, in 5 years' time, in terms of risk mitigation? Will there be things that companies aren't facing now that they'll have to face then? And what will be driving stuff like ESG, do you think, in 5 years' time?
Well, I think two things. The first one is when I look forward, the thing that gives me the biggest sense of optimism is I am seeing businesses step up to the challenge. We have an existential threat to the world. We know we need to act. And inevitably, politicians and governments are slower to act. What I've seen in the last few years is businesses really stepping into the breach, and particularly many of our customers wanting to do more, wanting to do the right thing and taking action. So that's the most positive thing. So I think, you know, as I look forward 5 years, I see business playing a leading role in helping addressing some of the challenges. I think in terms of some of the practical changes we'll see, you know, the last 2 years have changed global supply chains. We've seen disruption at a scale we've never seen before. Obviously, firstly with the global pandemic and then with the situation in Ukraine. And I think that's become a new normal. I don't think it's going to stop. I think we're going to continue to see that disruption. And with it, the importance of organizations having agility and innovation to respond to those challenges. So I think the first aspect I see changing will be the role of digital. And Georgia, you were mentioning earlier digital transformation. We're already seeing that. The global pandemic has brought it on. We are doing far more of our work remotely, which enables us to use our talent without now having to send people around the world. So we can use the talented people that we have more effectively to diagnose issues. And of course, by not having to send everybody traveling, we're actually, you know, doing our bit to help our environmental footprint as well. So digital technology particularly important, but I think with that also the increasing importance of data. You know, traditionally the programs that we have designed have been, I would say, quite analog. So we would put in place of systems and inspection and verification that would typically be, you know, once a year we would go and check something and ensure it was in compliance with rules and regulations or standards. What we've seen is the increasing way in which we can use data to monitor what's going on in real time, identify potential issues before they arise, and then make, you know, a physical audit and inspection intervention to actually prevent the issue happening in the first place. So I think, you know, going forward, we're going to see that much more continuous, always on process of assessment. And I think with it will come a much better quality and richer environment in which we can really make sure we're managing these quite serious risks, both for, you know, the business and also for the wider world and environment in which we live and work.
Well, thanks, Paul. And just one more question that we've had come through on the comments is it was about sort of the regulations that you discussed, you know, that are coming into force in Europe. But do we potentially need a global approach as well as sort of this more focused approach on particular regions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think for me, it's a multi-layered approach. So it's great to see government taking action because that helps. I think, you know, our business has grown up on the back of international standards and regulations facilitating global trade. And, you know, we would be a great believer in, you know, standards is a great way of driving consistency of performance. So it's not just about legislation, it can be the adoption and use of standards. And of course, that independent verification that companies like LRQA bring to it. And I think it's that combination of organizations taking their own initiative, doing the right thing, adoption of standards through supply chains, organizations putting pressure on their suppliers to behave in a particular way to align to their own brand standards, and then, you know, legislation as well. And I think the combination of the three will give us the outcomes that we want in terms of improved management and control in these critical areas.
Well, sadly, Paul, that's all we've got time for today. We could talk all afternoon about these subjects, really, couldn't we? But thank you ever so much for your time, Paul, and it was really nice having you on the show. It's
a pleasure. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Georgia.
Thanks. Cool. So it was great having Paul join us live on the show. So we've got more great content to share with you after this short break. So don't go away.
Procurement is the function of the future. It is a commercial function. My name is Alisa Bornstein. I'm Chief Procurement Officer for Visa Europe.
Everybody knows Visa. We're one of the most ubiquitous brands in the world, but not everybody knows exactly what we do. My name is Rob Livingston. I'm the CFO here at Visa Europe. What Visa does is we facilitate commerce each and every day all around the world. What that means is millions of transactions each day going over our network, enabling consumers to buy things at merchants.
third-party suppliers, and our supply chain has a role to play in ESG to cover all raising challenges in the world. And they are mainly, we're looking at sustainability and diversity.
Visa as a company is committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2040. There are a few key areas that we're focused on right now. One is about sustainable product solutions. We're also working very tactically with governments, banks, and other players in the ecosystem, particularly in the area of electric vehicle charging. Nobody goes out of the house and says, I want to pay for something today. They say, I want to get something today or have an experience. What we want to do is ensure that it happens as smoothly and as quickly as possible. For some consumers, that's going to be a tap with a card because that's the easiest for them. For others, it might be using their mobile phone. For others, if you're online, using Click to Pay. All those are different ways in which transactions become more and more seamless over time.
We have thousands of suppliers, and we are currently in the process to identify small businesses. We have recently entered into the partnership with EcoVadis. EcoVadis will support us in assessing our supply chain, understanding what our suppliers add in terms of ESG objectives.
We've made this commitment to bring 50 million small and medium businesses around the world and digitize them using the Visa platform. We've reached 25 million small businesses online today, but we think there's much more room to grow.
We changed their payment term to 30 days. We aim to pay them promptly on time to ensure that we will be soon ready for the UK government prompt payment code guidelines. Visa works with innovation on so many different levels. We do work with supply chain to ensure supply chain resilience, but also to ensure the commercial part of it, driving value and innovation in supply chain. This is big, and I truly believe that many procurement professionals starting to think much broadly, much more out of the box, thinking business-like.
The next 12 to 18 months are really about finding out what the shape of the recovery from the pandemic looks like.
Visa Europe procurement will focus on continuous journey of the transformation program. It never stops. It's continuous improvements.
Welcome back. Now, still to come, we have the results of our LinkedIn poll, more information on our upcoming events, and we will be taking a look at our latest issues of Supply Chain Digital and Procurement magazine. But first, let's have a look at what some of our followers are saying in the comments. So it's, again, as usual, it's a truly international audience we have, just like supply chain itself. We have Yamvi from Boston, Massachusetts, hello Yamvi, Sarah from Tunisia, Eric from Singapore, hello Sarah and Eric, and Mava from Paris, and Matum from Indonesia. So welcome to you all. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. And so next up, we're going to have a look at the magazines.
Yeah, so Sean, would you like to start with your picks for this week?
Yeah, I think we've probably only got time for one this week, Georgia. But from the latest issue of Supply Chain Digital, I'd like to have a look at a piece we did. In fact, you know, it goes back to ESG really, which seems to be the running theme through this show. It's a feature I wrote on sudden sort of sea change in the world of fashion and regulations that are governing sustainability and ESG compliance in fashion, because fashion up until relatively recently is a notoriously unregulated and sort of uncompliant sector where you have quite unsafe working conditions in some of the developing nations where these big brands draw a lot of their labor from, low pay, and the industry as a whole has suffered from a lack of regulation. And on the technology front, they don't have fantastic visibility across their supply chain, so it's very hard for them to monitor what's going on. And if you can't monitor, then you can't identify or address problems that may exist within your supply chain. But that is changing. And I spoke to Laura Gibson, who's head of sustainability at supply chain management company Core. And Laura was talking about, a groundbreaking new law that is just being instituted by New York State Assembly, which is going to hold big fashion brands to account on their supply chain sustainability. If they cannot verify their supply chain to the New York authorities and show that it is ESG compliant, then they can't do business with the state of New York, which, as you can imagine, is quite a big deal. Now, Laura says this is, although that it's a regional law, she said, its impact could send, a ripple effect around the globe in terms of other big cities following suit. And on that note, the EC has also introduced tougher sustainability directives with sectors like fashion in particular in mind, and actually quadrupling the number of companies who will have to now disclose their supply chain transactions. So there's a massive shift in the legislative landscape concerning the fashion sector.
Oh, thanks, Sean. It's certainly an interesting topic. I actually spoke maybe a year or two ago now to a company called Avery Dennison. They're an innovative packaging and labeling solutions company, and I discussed ESG in the fashion industry with them, and sort of the digital labeling solutions that they were developing to create a circular economy and be more sustainable. So it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. It is. So what about you, Georgia? What have you chosen from the May issue of Procurement magazine?
Yeah, so my pick this week is our cover feature for Procurement magazine. It's an interview with Johnson & Johnson's Chief Procurement Officer, Len de Canadia. I'm hoping I haven't butchered his name. In the feature, I discussed with him the sort of era of digitalization and massive inflows of data, and the opportunities that technology presents for procurement to contribute beyond its traditional sort of scope. I also spoke with Len about Johnson & Johnson's digital transformation strategy for its procurement, how it's transformed the function from a decentralized operation of 200 entities into a central strategic enterprise function. And then finally, I also talked to him about the company's resilience during COVID-19 and why for Johnson & Johnson that failure was not an option in that time.
Thank you very much for that, Georgia. Time's ticking on, so let's take a look at the result of the poll, shall we? Because something we were asking Paul about just a couple of minutes ago. So you remind us what the poll question was.
Yeah,
Georgia,
of course.
Please.
So the poll was, which of the following supply chain ESG transgressions is most damaging to a company's brand? And the options were greenwashing, forced labor, non-inclusivity, or whether they were all equally as damaging.
So Paul was saying that he felt they were all equally damaging, and it seems that our LinkedIn followers agree with him, because 59% say that those things are equally damaging. Then the next individually most damaging element was labor, 25%, greenwashing, 9%, and non-inclusivity at 6%. So seems to be that the message to companies there is you can't really transgress on any of those elements of ESG, and if you do so, whether you know it or not, then you do so at your peril. So it's little wonder, I suppose, Georgia, that the companies are so focused on this aspect of business at the moment.
Certainly, but it's definitely like with all the different things that are out there to like sort of navigate such a complex environment, and it's not just down to your organization alone. It's then spreads out to the suppliers and their suppliers and so on. And yeah, it's a very big sea to navigate.
Yeah, it is actually. George, I believe you've got some dates for the diary to tell us about.
Yeah, so this October we'll be heading to the Queen Elizabeth II Centre in London for a new expo style event called Supply Chain Live London 2022. So this hybrid event will be held from the 12th to the 13th of October, and will incorporate 2 expo zones, one for Supply Chain Live and another for Procurement Live. So it's definitely one to keep in the diary. Yeah,
one to look forward to. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for this episode. So we hope you've enjoyed the show, and thank you for interacting with us if you're watching live or taking part in the poll. And remember, also, this show is available to watch on demand. So please do share it with colleagues and anyone you think might be interested in supply chain and procurement. A big thank you to Georgia, as ever, and to our special guest, Paul Butcher, CEO of LRQA. Thanks to Ernie and the rest of the video production team, to Justin and the design team for the fantastic looking magazines, and to Kaylee and the marketing team. This has been a BizClick Media Group production, and we will see you next time. Bye.